The Late Morning Program with Namras Podcast.
Hare Krishna, everyone. You're listening to the Namras Podcast, the #1 Hare Krishna podcast in the world. And I'm so delighted to have His Holiness Jayadvaita Maharaj with us. Maharaj, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
So delighted to have you. So Jayadvaita Maharaj does not need any introduction, but we wanted to talk about Srila Prabhupada's Kirtan Standards, a brand new book, a handbook by Maharaj, with a collection of quotes as well as just also commentary on Srila Prabhupada's statements on Kirtan, how we should do Kirtan, what's Prabhupada's standards for Kirtan, how it should be done, what's the mood, even things such as what mantras we should chant, what we shouldn't. And a very interesting book, Maharaj. I went through it. I've been going through it, and
this is just released, right? Hot off the presses, as they say, not too long ago.
It's been out since Kartik, but it hasn't been circulating in America as long.
Okay,
right. When I searched for it on YouTube, there are some like seminars that you did around. Right. There's not like anything particular. I mean, the book is about the seminar also, but did you want to start with something?
Just especially given sort of the newness of the book, if you could just share with us, Maharaj, kind of how this book came to be. What are the origin stories, so to speak?
It started in Bombay. Devaki Nandan Prabhu there, and asked me to give a seminar on Kirtan, because in his view it was sort of somewhat out of shape. All sorts of things were going on that he wasn't very happy with. So he asked me to give a Kirtan, a seminar on Kirtan Standards. What did Prabhupada tell us to do? How should we do it? So I did. And I repeated the seminar again in Mayapur Institute on their request. And the book grew out of the seminars, really. My godbrother Taraka Prabhu from Gitanagari asked me to make a book of it, and also offered to pay for it. So I thought, all right, he's keen, let's do it. Right. So there you are.
And these seminars, these were given over a number of years. Yes, this isn't.
I'm bad on years, so the seminars went for 4 days at a time, and they were maybe they were spaced out by about a couple of years.
Yeah, I remember, and I'm also bad with dates, but I remember maybe a year or so ago, let's say, being with Maharaj in New York, and Maharaj, you were mentioning, I think, 2 book projects that you were working on at the time. One was the book that, eventually became the book that we have with us today. And another was a project around, I think, the 4 regulative principles, freedom. And I remember kind of half jokingly saying, wow, I bet the Kirtan book is going to be more controversial than the 4 reg book. Was that joke prescient? Is that, do you see this as a controversial book or not so much?
I think it was more controversial before I published it. That's to say,
how so?
The book was a little more rigid in its original, the way I originally conceived it. And I had some very good talks with various Kirtan leaders, especially in, pardon my age, the younger generation. And we, as well as other devotees, older devotees, and they persuaded me that it would be wise for me to loosen up a little bit, not hold back on my usual sarcasm, and be more on the ground with people. And so I think the result, I benefited from that. The book has benefited from that. So it's more accommodating than perhaps it might have been otherwise. And I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
What has the response been like?
The response has been very good. I think the people who may not be so happy with it have been fairly discreet about it. They haven't jumped up and down and Facebooked it up. But I've gotten many favorable responses. I've gotten some devotees have appreciated and say, I really want to do it right. There was no real guidebook for how we do kirtan, so it's just sort of by feel, by picking leaders you like and following their style. But there wasn't a cohesive set of instructions about it. So I've heard nice responses from devotees on that way. I spoke on the topic in Denver, and a girl, young lady came to me. She said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." She said, "I feel validated." Why do you feel? They told me I couldn't sing because I didn't have a voice. And now I understand that it doesn't matter what your voice is like, you can sing.
Wow.
So I thought that was a valuable response.
When it comes to kirtan, I find myself that maybe in my younger years, I would have had a lot of things to say as far as issues, but maybe I would kind of push back on things. But as I get older and maybe more conservative, I see the benefit of something like this, like, because it's not that anything goes. I remember it says do we even need a standard? There's like a part of this book which says that.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that there is a standard. And I think you made the difference in the beginning when you said the younger generation helped you define or helped you to realize that there's a difference between the temple as well as like a preaching engagement kind of thing, right?
Of course, even when we're out somewhere, we're still representing the sampradaya.
Right.
We're not just performers or independent agents. We represent a tradition, or we're presenting a sound that we're receiving from a transcendental source, and that puts a responsibility on us. But at the same time, it is also our responsibility to do it in a way that fits our best discretion.
Yeah.
There was some book on history where the author was saying that in war, the generals, draft a plan, it's quite in detail how everything's going to be, what we're going to do on this offensive, and then the troops hit the beach, and then everything changes because you can't know exactly what's going to happen, and then the responsibility goes to the commanders in the field. They have to make the decisions. They know what the plans are. They know what the objectives are. They know what it's all about, but they also know what's going on in the ground, and so they make the necessary adjustments. So I don't want to sit behind my computer and second-guess the commanders in the field. They're out there, and so it's up to them finally to decide what to do. But I hope that the book will be of service to them.
Yeah. There's a lot of places that I think we'd like to go in terms of exploring some of this. And I'll just say, frankly, one of the things that for years, decades even, I think it's fair to say that I personally appreciated about you, Maharaj, and I know Nam and I have talked about this, is your willingness to engage in conversation and dialogue, even with or especially with folks who may have a difference of opinion and may push back. And I hope I hope we can do some of that a little bit today. Both, in terms of things that we may have picked up on, but also to perhaps give some voice to
what we hear from the field,
what we hear out there in the field. Yeah. Right. Before we do that though, I do want to, I'm picking up on, we've talked about age and generation, and it's commendable, as Nam said, that you welcome that input from younger generations. I think there are some that would look at this book and almost instinctively see this as a generational clash, as older generation trying to hem in, reel in, control even a younger, enthusiastic generation. What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, I'd say that there is that tendency of the older generation to want to hang on and perpetuate 1968, and nothing should change between now and then, and control and so on. That's certainly, I think, a valid perception. I've tried not to do that. The opposite side is that the fossil generation is the generation that had direct contact with Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah.
We were the ones who saw what he did firsthand. We were the ones who got toasted by him or praised. And so we have that historical contribution to offer. And then it's up to everyone else to do what they want with it. We're not going to be, I'm not going to be there in the grave controlling what people can do or not do in kirtan. And it's not my role in this life either to be the judge and say, oh yeah, that was all right, this is not all right, and just shut people down or control them. But we should be informed, or we're better off when we're informed, when we know what Prabhupada said, when we know what examples he gave. That will help future generations know what to do or decide what to do. And it's not, if I could control it, that's a different thing. I'd write a different kind of a book, one that came with like shackles attached or something. But I don't think I want to do that, and in any case I can't. So what can I do but just pass on this information and let people use it according to their best discretion and intelligence.
Yeah, it's interesting.
If I could.
Please.
There was I received, Krishna.com relayed an order they received for the book from a woman who's now a historian in Boston. She's teaching at Boston College, if I remember. And she was keen to get it because she'd associated with the devotees in Boston back in the 70s, I think, and perhaps she lived in the ashram a short time, or anyway, she'd been quite seriously close. And she was delighted to note that there was a book giving this sort of historical background about what we were doing back in those days, and why we were doing it the way we were doing it.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you should say that, because one of the things I was thinking was, although you call it a handbook, and in many ways it reads like a handbook, it also it plays a role in terms of recording a certain history, which as time passes and as more and more of those devotees who had that personal contact with Srila Prabhupada leave us, there's that fear, right? That some of that history will be lost.
Yeah.
And so I was, I also kind of see this in terms of preserving that history.
Yeah, I think it's meant to perform that role.
Yeah.
The other devotees are the ones who are going to be carrying forward the kirtan movement. I'm not known for being a great kirtaniya or a leader of kirtan. So whether my generation or future generations, it's not going to be me. But this contribution I can make. So here's some history. Here's the way we were taught. I think that does have value. People ask me, "Are you going to write your memories, a memoir?" It's not really on my list. I don't have so much to. I gave an interview with Siddhanta Prabhu that probably has everything that I would have wanted to write. But I think this is in one sense, a more substantial contribution.
It's interesting that some of the things that I read in here about like the Hari Bol at the end of every kirtan. It's like it's been a normal for basically my whole life. But then to hear that wasn't done during Srila Prabhupada's, like by Srila Prabhupada, it's like a little jarring because it's like what I always knew. So have you ever had a conversation, like what was that conversation like with the youth that you mentioned in Alachua that Manoram Prabhu organized? What was that conversation like with the youth? Because the youth have experienced the things from the very beginning, but they might not have been the correct thing. They just might have been the cat in the basket kind of thing, you know?
For them, or even for us for that matter, if we're including ourselves in that category, there are things that for us are like the old school way of doing things that we just, I think, would assume is like, that is a tradition for us.
Yeah.
ISKCON tradition.
That's ISKCON tradition.
Yes. To answer, there was first of all, they did raise the question, you know, why do we need this? You know, what's the point? Which I thought, you know, what kind of question is that? But as I thought about it,
It's actually a great question.
it's a great question. You really need to answer that.
Right.
Why standards? So they raised that question. There was a lot of concern from that group and from other groups that I spoke with about not regimenting and straitjacketing.
Yes.
We don't want to be in kirtan looking over our shoulders, waiting for the thought police to pounce on us because we let out a Hari Bol or something. So there was a lot of concern with individuality and even creativity and not wanting to be boxed in. So that's a theme I've tried to give a fair amount of attention to.
Right.
Yeah. The sense is that if we look at all these instructions, then there's not going to be any room left for personal expression. And I take that on board, and there are things that individual kirtan leaders will do that will be different according to their nature. But I think it also helps focus the understanding that the real individuality doesn't come from the fancy stuff. It doesn't come from the feathers and flourishes. It comes from the depth of chanting.
Yeah.
You listen to. I was listening to a kirtan by Vishnu Jan Maharaj, what's called the studio kirtan, and there's nothing fancy there at all. It's really very straightforward. And Prabhupada's playing mridanga on the track, and it's also very straightforward, very simple. And yet the depth of feeling is wonderful. And that's what gives substance to that kirtan. And many other kirtaniyas that I can think of where the real substance comes from their dedication, their spiritual potency from their practice of devotional service. That communicates itself in such a way that the kirtan has force. I remember I was in Los Angeles about a week or so before my godbrother Madhudvisa passed away. He was living across the street from the temple and wasn't so mobile, little, but he could move around. And I was sometimes visiting him in his apartment. And anyway, there was a kirtan in the temple. I forget whether it was a festival day or just an ordinary day. The kirtan was going on, And then all of a sudden, someone began leading, and it just came to like 7 notches up. And again, it wasn't anything fancy, but Madhuvisa had taken the lead, and it just came from a completely different level of realization.
Wow.
And you could hear it in his voice. You could hear it in the kirtan. It wasn't just a beginning devotee following by, painting by numbers. It had real depth to it. So that's the place where you get the most valuable individuality. It's from the strength of your practice, from the strength of your spiritual realization, your devotion, from your sincerity, and it's less from your music, your artistic capabilities, or style. Which isn't to say that style has no place or so on, but the real substance is your devotion. Srila Prabhupada himself, in terms of musicianship, would not be in the top tier of Indian musicians or vocal artists. You've got Pandit Jashraj, you've got these incredible people who can do unbelievable things with notes and who have subtlety and nuance and just everything you could ask for. But what have they done? Maybe their singing might be sometimes a little moving. It's certainly engaging, but it hasn't spread the glories of Krishna all over the world, nor could it. And Prabhupada's kirtan, musically very simple, and with a voice which is, what can you say? It's a transcendental sound. It's not the sound of a polished artist. It's the sound of a pure devotee. And that sound has spread Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement all over the world. So he expresses his individuality, but not by doing something terribly innovative or flashy or fancy. It's by his powerful, pure devotional service.
Yeah. So Maharaj, is part of your critique then that we use, when I say we, I mean we collectively, we use things like the bells and whistles and the flourishes and sometimes even the kind of like creativity in terms of changing tunes and whatnot. Is part of your critique that we use those things as a substitute for the sort of the depth and the purity?
Yeah, I'm a little reluctant to call it a critique, but I suppose I can't really escape that. There are things that I really don't like.
Oh, I mean...
I guess that comes across. There are things that I wish I weren't hearing or don't feel comfortable when I hear them, or just feel like, again, and good time to chant japa or something.
Well, I've seen you write. I don't remember if it was in the book or in other things they've written, but I remember the phrase "voting with my feet" in terms of you're.
Yes,
you're not shy about walking out if you feel like it's right.
It's mentioned in Nectar of Devotion. It's one of the principles of devotional service that one shouldn't be angry before the deities. So rather than just hang out there and linger on there and be angry, better to go somewhere else and be angry. Or just get on with life, So yes, I suppose it is a critique, or just to put it more positively, I hope to encourage devotees to think that to go further in my kirtan, to really perfect my kirtan, what I need most is not style or professionalism or a greater repertoire of tunes and tals, but greater depth in devotional service, greater purity, greater Krishna consciousness, because that's where it all is. The alankars are just that. You you can put earrings on a pig, it'll still be a pig. So we can put all kinds of decorations on chanting that's not really chanting, that's done for money or that's done for other materialistic motives. And the alankars aren't really going to make it beautiful. What makes kirtan beautiful is our purity. And that's certainly a theme in the book that Prabhupada emphasized, that our kirtan is part of a process. It's not just that we do kirtan and that's all we do, then we go on to other things. I've seen that. When I was on Padayatra in Orissa was a great state because there were so many kirtan parties in Orissa. And we would go to a village, and when we were halfway there, a kirtan party from the village would meet us and join us for the kirtan and bring us all the way to the village. But then when they got to the village, they would sort of put down their mridangas and pull out their beedis and, sort of be back to other things. And that's not to say that they don't have enormous credit. I mean, it's just wonderful that you imagine going to some little town in North America and having a kirtan party come out, the local residents with kartals and mridangas. It's just wonderful how these people have that background and that culture and that sincere devotion also. But for us especially, and for everyone, devotional service is fortified by having what should we say? By being part of an authentic process, not just being an isolated item that we do kirtan. Just like the professional singers, they do kirtan. You can hear the what do they call them? Playback artists in India, and they'll do a beautiful kirtan, but it's just a number.
Right.
It's just singing. They go back to we know this actually because we have devotees working in Bombay who know these bhajan singers and so on personally, and some of them are renowned, but they're woman hunters, drunkards, and so on. So that kind of kirtan doesn't really have potency. But when kirtan is part of a process, when we're chanting, when we're following 4 regulative principles, when we're chanting our japa regularly, when we're reading Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, when we're worshiping the deity, when we have a purified life and we're engaged in devotional service, and kirtan is one of the things we do, or a major thing that we do, then that kirtan has enormous potency.
Yeah.
But when it's just, I only do kirtan, and then I go out and smoke some hash, that kind of kirtan is going to be a shell. And it may be a bright, shiny, attractive shell, but it's going to be a shell. But when the process is there, then the kirtan has great substance. And so the book includes in an appendix a discussion that Srila Prabhupada had about kirtan or chanting being part of a larger process, not just an isolated item.
I love that point about it being part of the process.
Yeah. Maharaj, devil's advocate or pushing back a little bit. In many cases, what you're describing may be known or patently obvious in the case of, let's say, a kirtaniya who's not following principles, or in other cases though, don't we run the real risk of kind of making a lot of assumptions? I hear a kirtaniya, the kirtaniya seems to be really into the musical flourishes. I might be tempted, based on a reading or perhaps a misreading, I may be tempted to say, well, this person really lacks depth and devotion. they may have that depth and devotion, and they may also just really be into a certain, musical expression. So does that take us back to this kind of, isn't there a place for that personal expression as well?
I've included somewhere in the book this point that as participants or followers in the kirtan, or even hearers of the kirtan, we don't want to place ourselves in the position of judges.
Yes.
Yes.
So that we're sort of sitting on a perch somewhere, sitting on an elevated position, saying, well, too much of this, not enough of that. And, then as hearers, we're defective in the hearing process.
Yeah.
And we want to appreciate, we want to see the Krishna's presence in the holy name, and not just be distracted ourselves or fooling ourselves by taking an exalted position or a position better than others, and then instead of hearing the holy name, we're hearing all the faults, and we're making our mental evaluation sheet. That's not going to help us either. So yes, we do want to appreciate. And often, you have naturally, when someone learns anything, they copy. When you're a writer, you copy other writers.
Yeah.
That's what you do. And in the beginning, a teacher could say, well, the student has some ability, but he's really copying Faulkner or copying Dickens or whatever it is. And they'll say, if they're positive, they may comment, that you have good capability, and I hope you'll work with that and find your own voice. But that takes some time.
Yeah.
In the beginning, we copy. And so, you hear a kirtan in Mayapur and you say, okay, there's a Lokanath Maharaj man, or there's a Govinda Maharaj man. You could hear right away who they're copying. And that's fine. In the beginning, we copy. But who's Badahari copying? Somebody made that point to me the other day. Who's Badahari Prabhu copying? You can't trace it and say, oh, he's copying this person. That he's Badahari chanting the holy name. And as devotees become mature, who's Indradumna Maharaj following? Who's Govinda Maharaj? You hear the advanced devotees chanting from their own heart, chanting with their sincerity, and not just sort of trying for the style or the style of someone they admire.
Yeah.
So, but in the beginning, it's not really a fault. We do that, and
I've observed nowadays that the devotees I was talking with a friend, and he was saying how nowadays it's more about the musicalship than it is about the advancement in one sense, or the age or the seniority of the devotee. Like when I was a kid, I remember there was so many devotees who would lead kirtan, or just Swat Prabhu or Vishnu Gada Prabhu, but those devotees seem to have taken a step back, or they're not here anymore or whatever, but maybe they're feeling a little bit like, we don't have the same musical ability, when it's not about that, from what you're saying, right?
I don't know of any of my godbrothers who are taking a step back because they think, well, I don't have the musical ability. Some of them may just say, let's give space to the younger devotees, or some of them may feel like, I'm exhausted,
Yeah.
I don't have it, or whatever reason.
But do you think the mood is, because what I'm hearing in your observation is maybe there's been a shift in mood where even for us, let's say in the 90s, there was still more of an emphasis, although there was an emphasis. Everyone you named is, in my mind, musically pretty amazing, but also kind of really depth and has that sort of maturity and seniority. And Nam, are you saying that you've seen a shift to like more of a focus on the kind of musicianship?
In some places, yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard some beautiful kirtan leaders who are young people. I don't know their names. I don't know very much about them, but you hear their kirtan, you just say, oh, that's just lovely kirtan. It's just, it's got depth, it's got devotion, it's clean, it doesn't have a lot of junk in it. You just say, wow, that's beautiful kirtan. And
we got to come back to that, by the way. I want to know more about what's clean and what's junk, but we'll get there.
I guess the point I'm making is that I want it when I'm in a kirtan, like if I'm in a room full of devotees, like that old devotee who's been practicing for like 50 years, I want to hear them sing. I want to hear them lead the kirtan. Even if it's not like the most, amazing, they're not the most amazing musician, I want to feel that depth. And I have felt that. Like, so for example, like Yodubar Prabhu, he's not like amazing musician, but when he does kirtan, it's like, it's so deep and so amazing. That's
he's on
what
my
I
top
want to be.
Whatever list.
We should prioritize those devotees to do kirtan. And this is coming from a younger generation, so I can say this about my peers.
This is also, Nam, I know you're not going to say this, but I'm going to say it on your behalf. This is also coming from someone I consider one of the most amazing, empowered kirtaniyas. Like, I love your kirtan. And so to hear you talk about who you feel inspired by counts a lot. And I think it counts a lot to a lot of people, a lot of devotees, especially young devotees listening.
I several times quoted Lochanananda Prabhu in the book,
right?
Whose kirtan is just wonderful kirtan.
Wonderful, yeah.
So there are such kirtaniyas from the old generation, and they're just wonderful to hear. And again, there are kirtaniyas from the new generation who are newer generations who are wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
They, in my thinking, it's those who are chanting from pure devotion, from strong devotional service. That's where the potency is.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is exactly aligned with what you're observing, or if this is maybe taking us slightly in a different direction. But one of the things I've noticed is I feel like Kirtan in ISKCON has become a kind of a subculture of its own in a way that feels different, at least, than I experienced, you and I maybe experienced in the 90s or even before that, where there seems to be a real sort of, for lack of a better term, it's sort of like there's something very cliquish, or can be something very cliquish about it. Mm-hmm. I had this kind of somewhat, it was a little bit of a bizarre experience for me. I won't say exactly where this was. I'm not trying to call anyone out, but I was visiting a center with my family, and somewhere I'd never been before. And the local devotees didn't know me at all. So this wasn't a case of, someone knew me from before. And we just walked in, and we walked in at a time where they were just about to have, there was some kind of something kirtan based. I don't know if it was an art, I don't remember, but, and almost immediately the devotees who were organizing looked at me and were like, oh, he's a kirtaniya, get him to lead. And they didn't know me. And those who do know me know that I'm not necessarily known for my kirtan, let's put it that way. But I had a certain look. I was wearing a certain kind of buglebandi. I'm not kidding you. I had a certain kind of Nambali chadar.
Interesting. I
have a beard. I had a certain hairstyles a couple of years ago, or the ear, right? So just visually, I was sending off this cue. And later, the devotee actually told me this. So I don't think I'm just making this up. He actually reflected back kind of I just sort of, he basically said, I just sort of assumed, right? And I hadn't thought of it. I wouldn't, when I got ready that day, I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to try to pass myself off as, but somehow, I guess, for whatever reason, I was attracted to that aesthetic, and that's how I was dressed. But anyway, the point of my story though is it's just, for reasons that had nothing to do with musicality, for reasons that had nothing to do with bhajan and maturity and seniority and devotion, but just, it was the look.
Yeah.
Right? I thought that was so interesting. I never stopped to think about it, but there's even a kirtan look.
The journalist and author Tom Wolfe, in one of his, apart from being an author, he'd studied, I think, drawing and graphic arts. And so in one of his early books, he illustrated the book with various illustrations, pen drawings of sort of looks that you'd see in New York City, you know, the ducktail, this and the, anyway, they were quite amusing. A little bit exaggerated, but really capturing the kind of looks, the kind of profiles that people projected in New York City. So if I'd had the talent, I could have illustrated this book that way. You know, the forest dweller look with the top knot and the that, and then there's the caveman look, and there's a few more. The Vrindavan Pujari look.
That's probably the one that I gravitate towards. Yeah.
The one you were talking about. So, you know, and yes, it becomes about the look. You know, we like Krishna adjusting his sash before he jumps in to go after Kali. You know, we sort of adjust our look and then we sit down and do kirtan. So yeah, there's definitely that. There's a kirtan look, and there's also something of a tendency for kirtan to become a sort of performance art, where we do something that's musically perhaps more sophisticated, more polished, more interesting in some ways, and which those who are in our circle know how to do. So everybody's on it. The mridanga player knows when to shift. The kirtan leader knows when to shift. Everybody, the kartal players, they're all on board, and everybody knows how to make this kirtan performance come off. But others are just sort of left out. They unless you've got the voice, unless you've got the musical proficiency, you can watch, you can listen, maybe you can join in to some extent, but it's really not something you'll be drawn into and can easily take part in. So it's a performance. Looking at it from one point of view, it's an offering to the deities. It's something, you know, we're worshiping the holy name. So I don't want to just run it down and say this is worthless, but it has, so it has its value. But it also is something of a performance and something of an exclusive performance, something you have to have practiced at to take part in. And Prabhupada's kirtan wasn't like that. It was something that everybody could join because it was simple, because it was easy, because it didn't change. It just went on for half an hour or 3/4 of an hour, just the same tune, repeated again and again with just some minor variations. So you'd feel yourself drawn in, and you'd just go deeper and deeper into meditation on this transcendental sound. And that was the way Prabhupada did it.
Yeah.
So yes, I think there is something of a culture of this sort of performance art kirtan.
Yeah.
And again, it has something to be said for it, but
perhaps there's a price that it's also paid for.
Yeah, there's a price. There's a price.
The word, I mean, you didn't use this word, but a word that's coming to my mind right now is accessible or accessibility.
Yeah.
And it's the way you describe Prabhupada's kirtan, if we can call it that broadly. It feels like it was just so intentionally accessible and invitational. And I never thought about this as someone who really kind of does enjoy, I mean, I'll be honest, I do enjoy some of the performative aspects of what you're talking about, especially as someone who is on the outside of it and you know, is like in the audience. But one of the things I realize is, and maybe this is even part of why I enjoy it, is it allows me to be quite passive.
Right.
And if I'm being honest, sometimes it's a lot more comfortable to be really passive and wowed by someone else's, I mean, I'm being honest, right? Like by someone else's,
it's a really interesting point.
And I don't really have to be in the kirtan in the same way that one of these accessible kirtans or invitational
They're
kirtans.
absorbed.
Yeah.
You don't have to be.
I don't have to be.
Yeah. We're just watching them.
And I can go,
enjoy
wow,
it.
did you hear that? That's
amazing.
Amazing. And I can record it with my phone.
Exactly.
And I can, you know.
People go to Vrindavan. Now it's like the majority of people who go visit our Vrindavan temple, you know, their darshan is like this, you know, they've got
With
their
phones up.
they've got their cell phones.
Yeah.
And or in lectures too, you know. Parikshit Maharaj sat down to hear, but now we come with our cell phones to, you know, because we're the official videographer. So what does that mean? It means I don't have to be involved. I'm a witness. I'm recording it for history or to, you know, for Facebook or what have you. But I'm not really involved in the process of hearing. And in the same way, yes, I think your point is valid that we can sit back and enjoy the kirtan or appreciate the kirtan, but we don't have to be involved in the same way. We don't have to do the same work that real involvement in hearing calls for.
Yeah.
We might think it's just like a performative thing, and then people are chatting in the back and things like that. But when you look at it in a way that it's a spiritual activity, it's a part of our practice, then it becomes so much more different. Like when you see, you know, when you go to a kirtan where even the newer people are seeing that this is a meditational practice. They've been explained that this is a meditational music mantra practice, and they're sitting and they're actually chanting and eyes closed and involved in the kirtan as opposed to like.
I've had this experience recently where I actually really enjoy, not just enjoy, but I actually have gotten a lot out of. Like I found it very nourishing. Where there are kirtans that are like aimed at newcomers or like instructional.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's quite embarrassing, but I realized like, wow, I never really learned how to meditate so well. And like, you know, this way I can kind of quietly just be there. And I know it's not really being said for my benefit, but it actually is really like, I need to learn this too.
Yeah.
And I found some of those kirtans again, and now that I hadn't thought of it in terms of this, but now that I think of it, almost all of those kirtans are much more, like they're just simpler, more accessible, easier to follow, all of that, right?
Yes.
I have to say also that I've really appreciated some of the work that younger kirtan leaders are doing in bringing new people on board, you know, to going to this venue or that venue and making kirtan accessible. When you hear Gauravani, for instance, just talk about kirtan and what it is, it's like he speaks, he's such a good communicator that everybody's head goes like this, you know, he's just, this is a transcendental sound, yeah, okay, and you fix your mind on the, you know, whatever he says, somehow or other, he's so gifted that people just agree. And then they chant and they get absorbed in the kirtan. So I've really appreciated that the devotees who are going out there, going to different venues, whether it's yoga societies or it's Times Square or wherever it is, they're doing wonderful service by service to the holy name and service to Mahaprabhu's movement.
And when they do that, Maharaj, they're in many cases departing from some of these standards that you mentioned, no?
Most cases they're departing from the ISKCON standard, but perhaps they're closer to Prabhupada's standard. Or, yes, they're doing something that's different, maybe something I'd say, I'm not sure about that. But the part that I really appreciate is that they're on it, they're working on it. And that I heard a talk by an entrepreneur one time, and he was at the end of his talk about how he started his company and the whole history of it, and said, so what's your advice to new entrepreneurs? He said, my advice would be, do something. Because if you do something, something will happen. You know, you'll get better at it, you'll get new ideas, people will come on board, and the thing will evolve. If you don't do anything, then you'll continue not to do anything. So these kirtaniyas are going out there. They're as Bhaktivedanta Thakur says, trying to spread the holy name around. So Krishna can give them more and more inspiration and intelligence and so on. So we have to encourage that and appreciate that, and not just be eager to shut people down because they added a Haribol or some other mortal sin, committed some other mortal sin. So that's there. At the same time that I appreciate all the new things being done and the efforts being made, I think that the kirtan can be improved, can be deepened. Sometimes we think that we're attracting people by this method, that method, and it's really the holy name that's attracting people. There's a quote to that effect from Prabhupada. Really, it's the pure chanting of the holy name that's going to attract people.
Mm.
We may think it's, because we've got a gong or a electronic tambura or something like that, and that's what, but really it's the way we dress. But which isn't to say we shouldn't dress nicely or play the instruments nicely or something, but really what attracts is the holy name of Krishna. That's finally the thing. So it's wonderful that this sort of enthusiasm for kirtan is there. For me, I'm involved in New York City to some extent, and when I think about what we could do in New York City, my main thought is just do kirtan everywhere. Mm-hmm. Ram Roy is doing such nice service down in the subways, Union Square, this place, that place, and he's not. He doesn't have the golden voice, but he's so determined to do kirtan, and people buy books, people join the kirtan, people become devotees, people hear it, and even that is wonderful. And it's become like an institution because he's so sincere. But now imagine all the places you could do kirtan in New York. You could this park, that park, another park, this subway stop, that subway stop, another subway stop, this concert hall, this yoga society, that Unitarian church, this social context, this home, that place. So when you this radio show, just make a list, start a list of all the places you can do kirtan, and then work on it.
Yeah.
We could do this according to your inclination, your taste, your opportunities. We could do kirtan here, we could do kirtan here, we could do kirtan here, we could do kirtan here. Because that's the main thing we do. We're the Sankirtan movement. So the more we can do kirtan, and the more powerfully we can do kirtan, the more regularly we can do kirtan, the more extensively we can do kirtan, the more Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement will spread, because that's what we have. We have kirtan. We have books. Our books are extended kirtan, Brihad kirtan. So this combination of what do we need to do? Chant Hare Krishna, give some philosophy in the form of books, and give people Krishna Prasadam. If we do those three things, what a movement. And who's such a fool that they wouldn't be attracted? Who's so unfortunate? There are such unfortunate creatures, but innocent people and so many people can just be attracted. Wow, it's something about it's catchy. Whatever it is, it sticks in your head. That mantra will have its effect. Prabhupada, one time he said, you go out on the street and do your kirtan, and someone in the neighborhood, he'll pass by. He'll say, what this nonsense is doing. And then, because you're going out every day and he's like regularly passing by, finally he says, this nonsense is nice. Let me be nonsense like this also. So there's no limit to where we can do kirtan, the opportunities for doing kirtan, and then along with kirtan, introduce our books. Prabhupada, in the beginning, that's what he did. He had us go out for kirtan, and then he said, now along with the kirtan, you try to distribute this back to God.
Yeah.
How are we going to do that? All we knew was how to go out and chant.
Yeah.
Now and then after that, now when Bhagavad Gita was published, the little abridged Macmillan edition, so now you distribute the books along with the kirtan. How are we going to do that? It costs $5. But back in those days was big money. But now it's like, along with the kirtan, people listen and they go away with a stack of books this big.
Yeah.
So kirtan, books, and along with the kirtan and books, prasadam, you have a wonderful movement.
I'm so struck just hearing you say this, that in your enthusiasm to encourage, and at the same time, I think it's easy for someone, and just frankly speaking, just based on the sort of the topic, maybe not even going through the book, but to see this more in the vein of, like we were saying earlier, limiting of one of the things I've heard from particularly younger devotees, but also other, devotees of all ages, is this sort of, why do we need something to discourage us right now when we should, Jayadvaita Swami should be out there just encouraging everyone to do kirtan, like however they do it.
Well, I'll encourage you to do kirtan, and from one point of view, however you do it, but then once you're doing it however you do it, then would you be interested in knowing how Prabhupada wanted us to do it?
I love that. Yeah. Would you be interested in, yeah.
So you're saying, you're trying to add value here. You're not trying to like limit anyone, dampen anyone's enthusiasm.
That's the point. It's not for shutting people down,
Right.
Yes.
or putting people in prison, or throwing water on the fire of
Right.
enthusiasm. But would you be interested in making your kirtan still more effective? Would you be interested in going deeper in your kirtan? Of course you would.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? We do that by hearing from Srila Prabhupada what he asked us to do, and also what he asked us not to do.
Mm-hmm.
Where did we get kirtan from? It wasn't from Anup Jalota. It was from Prabhupada. So Prabhupada's the world expert in kirtan, or you can say the world, he's the person who brought the holy name of Krishna to the world. And by hearing from Prabhupada and by following Prabhupada, we'll make our kirtan something better than celestial.
Mm-hmm.
By hearing from the professionals, we can make it celestial. But the celestial planets are part of the material world. By following Prabhupada, we'll go beyond the three worlds. The kirtan will come. Prabhupada said that. Vishnu Jan wrote a letter to Vishnu Jan and said, when I was hearing you chanting in Los Angeles, I felt myself transported to Vaikuntha.
Wow. Amazing.
Felt myself transported to Vaikuntha. So that kind of kirtan.
So Maharaj, one distinction that we've been making, I think, so far in this conversation, and I'll personally say, what you're saying right now really resonates with me and seems quite reasonable, in a way that, if I'm being honest, I was kind of surprised by. I was expecting not to like the book as much as I liked it, if I'm being honest. And maybe some of that is just perception, right? This perception of, this is dampening enthusiasm. This is being the kirtan police and this and that, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what I'm getting in this conversation. It's almost coming out in this conversation.
I just heard from one of my godbrothers that he proposed to his wife that together they read the book, and she said, okay, but we can stop, right? If we're, at some point we can stop if we don't want to continue reading. He said, yeah. And but she loved the book. She was also surprised. She wrote me a letter appreciating. So, and I think the credit for that goes to the devotees that had their input before I
Mm-hmm.
before I wrote it, because I tend to be more curmudgeonly than perhaps I should be. So my thanks to them.
Well, I think it's very much to your credit that you, as a writer and as a seasoned writer, and as someone who very much has, conviction when it comes to this topic, that you still sought that kind of input and feedback and took it seriously, I think speaks a lot. And I just want to appreciate that as well.
Thank you. But it's really part of Prabhupada's standard also that he didn't just say, do it this way or don't do that, but he also encouraged, and he knew when also to just let anybody do anything.
Yeah.
To play the guts of a piano in the kirtan, and when to be strict. And one of my in the index, one of my favorite entries is let's see, I think it's Prabhupada, Kirtan stopped by because of, and then there's a list of like 7 items. Prabhupada stopped the kirtan.
Stopped the kirtan. Dead in his tracks, right?
Stopping the kirtan moments. Yeah.
So so that's there. The Prabhupada, both sides are there. That he would just say, stop this. What is this nonsense? And on the other side, just let everyone do whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah.
There's
those sides are there.
Yeah, both sides are there, and there's a place for each.
It's something that Nam and I have often speak about personally, and then also with different guests on the podcast. It's come up in different ways, and just this idea of, and we'd really be interested to hear your thoughts on this, that of Srila Prabhupada's multifaceted, sort of dynamic nature, and how that's often aspects of Prabhupada are emphasized, or shall we say, maybe reflected through different disciples who gravitate towards, maybe one mood over another or something like that. So in that vein, I just want to kind of put this forth to you. A couple of devotees I spoke to who are quite, thoughtful devotees, so I want to take what they're saying seriously. They said they actually appreciated the book, but they really kind of take exception to calling it Srila Prabhupada's Kirtan Standards. And they said it should really be Jayadvaita Swami's interpretation of, or appreciation of, or whatever, but this is your take. This is, and from what I can understand, that the point is they see it as, to say this is Prabhupada's stance on Kirtan, the be-all, end-all, is to them feels limiting and feels kind of biased.
I had that input before, while I was writing the book, or when I was sending the draft around, and I thought about it. Is the title legitimate, or is it sort of am I just claiming an authority that I don't really, that the book doesn't deserve? And I tried to be open about it, but then when I thought about it, I thought, no, really it is. And I addressed that, I think, in the book. Let me see how fast I am. Let me think about that just for a moment. Yeah. Or maybe I'll just paraphrase rather than page through and
There are standards. That's one of them.
yeah. The passage I'm thinking of says that I've tried to keep myself from overpowering. I've tried to keep myself from having my own views stamped upon Prabhupada's teachings. That I've tried to. I've done a lot of research and tried to bring out what Prabhupada himself said, so that the book represents Prabhupada's Kirtan Standards. And the reader, and you'll see where I've got my own peeves or preferences, and I think I've made clear, or I don't think readers will have a hard time seeing where this is, okay, here's Jayadvaita Swami's take on A or B or C. But I've tried hard to make it what Prabhupada said.
Yeah.
And the readers can judge for themselves the extent to which I've been successful. And I'm sure it's not 100%, and I don't know what percent below that it might be, whether it's in the low 20s or whatever. But you go through the book and it's, Prabhupada said this and Prabhupada said that, and this happened here and that happened there. I didn't make these things up. They're taken from authentic sources, and where even Prabhupada says things that are perhaps not in line with my own preferences. I'd rather not emphasize this or that point. The evidence has to rule. It can't be filtered according to the kinds of kirtans that I like and the kinds of kirtans I don't like as much.
Just offhand, do you have an example of that? Is that something that...
Yeah. Where it comes to instruments, there's a long section about the use of various instruments in kirtan. And as you know, these days it's all about so often it's, the violins and the cellos and the flutes and the harmoniums and the trumpets and the trombones and the glockenspiels and the, whatever kind of instruments we want to bring in. And from my, I listened to it and I said, oh, please, could we just, even I listened to kirtans like that, led by my favorite kirtan leaders, some of them, and I go back and look, for their older recordings before the instruments became so much in vogue, because that's my personal preference. But I've included pages of Prabhupada, of instances where Prabhupada is encouraging or appreciating or various kinds of instruments played in kirtan. So, in fact, I just added one for the next printing.
Really?
Yeah, I just came across a letter and had something, so it added further weight to that point. So it goes in the next printing. I was in Hawaii. I heard from one of our godbrothers there about a kirtan that was held at a church there where Siddha Swarupananda led kind of a electric guitar kirtan, and Prabhupada didn't say anything about it, although in other contexts on that visit he was quite down on this or that. He didn't express anything. So that's in the book. Mm-hmm. I didn't say, well, we don't have to include every incident, do we? So, I didn't do a file drawer on it.
Right.
I tried to be faithful to what Prabhupada instructed.
Yeah. There's a famous example, I think that's often when we talk about Prabhupada's flexibility and innovativeness and liberality, there's that,
There's that.
The innards of the piano at Second Avenue. Is that
the guts of the piano?
The guts of the
Maharaj
piano.
talked about it.
Yeah.
When the book was nearing publication, I'd had an endorsement from Sachinanda Maharaj that appears on the back cover of the book, appreciating the book. And I wanted to make sure he was okay with it before I splashed it on the back cover. So we were at a kirtan event and I brought it up to him and said that essentially. He looked at it, he put on his glasses, he looked at it, and he said, Ja. He said, it's the beginning of a conversation.
I love that.
I love that, yeah.
Wonderful, isn't it?
That's great.
The beginning of a conversation. It's not the last word.
Yeah.
There's be further discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to get into specifics.
Can we? I was actually going to say, well, first of all, like the sort of podcast, editor in me is like, oh, wow, that's like such a great place to end. But then I'm like, no, I want to get into some of the specifics.
Yeah.
Before we go on to that, though,
Yeah.
I wanted to mention Madhava's his foreword.
Beautiful forward.
Oh, man.
Very
it's
nice.
Like
Yeah.
they just fabulous.
Yeah.
You know, even if you don't like what I wrote, just his foreword is worth the price of the book. It's realized knowledge.
Yeah.
And well expressed. So
Yes.
grateful to Madhav, and also appreciative that he's really got it.
I would like to get into specifics. So if anyone wants to stop listening at the beginning of a conversation and keep everything all warm and fuzzy, we can do that. We might delve into some stuff where there is some agree to disagree with some of the specifics. I think that's where, at least I'll say for myself as a reader, and as someone appreciative of the sort of larger conversations that this book opens up, I did find myself in places really just kind of like, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. In other places, sort of, if not rolling my eyes, at least sort of biting my lower lip and saying, did you really have to go there, Maharaj? I'm not sure I agree with that. And
We can get into those. What I liked about some of these things is like, some of the specific examples are that there are things that devotees do that they don't know a lot about why they're doing it. Like, for example, the Guru Vashtakam in the morning. Some say that it's all about, we're singing about Srila Prabhupada.
it's the Prabhupada song.
It's the Prabhupada song, right? But you mentioned here that it was like that when it was only all Srila Prabhupada disciples, but as now has time gone, grand disciples, great grand disciples, it's about the basically Guru.
Yeah, you can't legislate that this is the Prabhupada song because it was the Prabhupada song for you.
Yeah.
It's the song for the Guru.
Right.
And
you've gotten flack for saying that.
oh, flack. I quoted one of my godbrothers speaking to that point. I left out some of the stronger things that he said as to preface that critique. So I have gotten flack for that. Plus, there was somebody who thought it was cute to take something that I said and snip it, make a 10-second video clip out of a larger point.
Oh, Nam, how do you feel about people who clip things and make 10-second reels? And
That's my bread and butter.
clickbait, QJ.
Yeah.
But in that particular instance, it was really something taken out of context. And
That was really taking out of context. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a cheap shot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
total
it was
cheap
a total
shot.
cheap shot.
Total cheap shot.
Because the implication of that, and we won't get into the specific, but the implication of that was that you were, it was insinuating, or perhaps even stating outright, that you were being offensive to your guru, to Prabhupada.
Of course. So what can be done? Such is the internet. But
Specifics.
But the point with the Gravastakam is you were saying, like,
yeah, so the Gravastakam, if someone does think of Prabhupada, wonderful. But are we unhappy if he thinks about his guru? Is that something we're not supposed to do? Is that against some ISKCON principle or something? Oh my God, he thought the song had something to do with his guru? That's a concoction. Can't do that. So
that's one example of something that we all sort of have kind of by osmosis, or we've inherited certain like misunderstandings,
or during Mangalarti, sometimes people think that the verse that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said to say was singing Haraye Nama Krishna Yadavaya Nama Gopal Govindaram is a part of that Sri Nam Kirtan song that Narottam Das Thakur sang, where it's like Echai Gosai Kore Charnavan, that whole long song that we're singing that, but we're actually not singing that.
That's a song also where like there's like a clear drop off. As like there's less and less devotees who know more verses
the rest
of it.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry, that's just my own snarky observation.
I know what you're talking about.
Right? It's like
true. Yeah.
But that just those two lines should be sung. I've heard it sung during Mangalarti time, right?
Yeah, that's what Prabhupada asked us to sing. It's fortunately it's there in Chaitanya Charitamrita. What he directly instructed.
Right.
But now we're accustomed to chanting Hare Krishna and the Panchatattva mantra, and now these 2 lines can be added. The 2 lines were chanted by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu while he was wandering in the Vardesh. And Prabhupada, now these 2 lines can be added, especially in Mayapur. But he was clear. He said these 2 lines,
Right.
not 4, not 8, not 16 or more.
Yeah.
So people perhaps have, they heard that Prabhupada wanted us to add Haraye Nama Krishna to the Kirtan, and so they add Haraye Nama Krishna to the Kirtan in the way they're familiar with it because they've heard the song. And then that becomes the sort of etched in stone ISKCON tradition. But then when you go back and look at the book, and so there's an example. It's Prabhupada's Kirtan standard. It's not that I don't know the whole song, so I wish you wouldn't sing it. It's just, here's the instruction. Now do what you want, but this is what he told us to do.
Yeah. One last one before we get into more specifics, but the chanting the Panchatattva mantra between
I was just going to say that one.
That was like mind-blowing because I only learned that maybe 5 or so years ago, that Srila Prabhupada never said or never
that seems like one of those things that's
anyone
taught
to
as
do that.
like almost like gospel, right?
Yes,
and like,
my dad taught me that. When he taught me how to chant when I was a kid, he taught me how to do that.
Right. And it's like, that's what you do.
Yeah, just the other night I was talking about the book a little bit and I gave that example. And, again, more than half the room raised their hands. This is what we do.
Yeah.
This is what we were taught.
So maybe that's a good one for me to, I don't know, I keep saying pushback. I don't know if it's a pushback or if it's just, again, as Satchidananda Maharaj said, beginning of a conversation. So let's have some of these conversations. But that's an example where it's like, okay, so now I know what the sort of history of that is. But it's not a bad thing. It's quite a nice thing. And it's actually become something that, like, I haven't stopped doing it. I don't feel like it takes away in any way or harms or detracts from my rounds. If anything, maybe it gives me a little bit of a boost.
When you say you have to do that, I think that's the problem.
Yeah, it's up to you. Panchatattva mantra can be chanted anytime. It's like when you wake up, you can chant it. When before you take prasadam, you can chant it. You can chant it between rounds. You can chant it before you chant any of your rounds.
Right.
You can chant it at the end. You can chant it wherever you want. But just understand that it's not a prescription.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not something that Prabhupada said you must do this, you should do this. So if you want to, you can. And if you don't want to, that's fine too.
Yeah.
It's not that this is something that's like part of our teaching.
Right.
But that's what it becomes. As you said, this is what I was taught to do.
Yeah.
And that's not what I was taught to do by Prabhupada or what any of us were taught to do by Prabhupada. I sat in so many initiations. So you start on this end and you come to the other end, then you go back, you don't cross this bead, you go back. And that was it. There was no Panchatattva mantra instruction.
So just so I'm understanding correctly, so it's not about this is good, this is bad. It's about, let's kind of have a set the record straight, or let's
we should know if something is optional or it's required, whether it's an instruction Prabhupada gave us or it's something that people thought was an instruction that Prabhupada gave us.
Yeah.
But really wasn't.
And it's important to know that. Why?
Evam parampara praptam, because we're a movement in which we get understanding by hearing unadulterated knowledge coming down from generation to generation. That's our process. Otherwise, sakala neha mahata yoga nashta. Something gets added, something gets added, something gets subtracted, something gets changed, and at the end you've got pea soup.
I think the example I've heard you say in a class or something where it was like Central Park has always been really protected.
Oh, yes.
You know this example? It's such a great example. Central Park has always been super protected in its footprint. Like if anyone wanted to go even a little bit into Central Park, they've been very protective of it. Because if years went by and they just put a foot here, a foot here, a foot
The
here.
idea was that it was an article I saw somewhere. The various proposals have come up over the years. We could have a gazebo here, we could have something here, we could have something, all these various enhancements to Central Park, and the city has steadfastly resisted them. And I think the article mentioned if they'd accepted them all, there'd be nothing left of Central Park.
Right.
So it's a bit of a slippery slope argument, right?
It's a bit of a slippery slope, but by being strict about it, they preserved. After all, the park was made by the top-notch architects who really had a plan and knew what they were doing. So someone has an idea, someone has an idea, someone has another idea, and pretty soon it's a whole different park.
Yeah.
So we don't lose anything by keeping it as it is. And I've quoted in the book so many places where Prabhupada said, do as I'm doing. I've been reminded often enough that Prabhupada said, don't change anything.
Mm-hmm.
So don't add anything, don't subtract anything. And reminded often enough by Prabhupada himself and others as well. Don't add, don't subtract, don't change. Otherwise you'll ruin everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that applies in all the departments of our activities. The deity worship, Prabhupada was so, why make a point of but Prabhupada was so strict about it. Don't introduce mental concoctions. Just do it as, the way I've instructed you.
Yeah.
Because it matters. Otherwise the deity worship becomes all whimsical.
Mm-hmm.
So Maharaj is using the example of deity worship for a moment, though. Isn't it also true that Prabhupada did encourage his disciples and future generations of devotees to learn, to grow, right? We have a vast, vast tradition, and one could say that Prabhupada gave what he could, gave a lot. Everything he gave was perfect in the sense of giving us the essence. And there's also room for devotees to mine the wealth of our own tradition, right? So here I'm not talking about going outside of our tradition.
No, the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition.
But even the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, or maybe even more broadly in some cases, because Prabhupada, at least in the case of deity worship, had some admiration for, let's say, the Sri Vaishnava tradition, certain aspects. I say, full disclosure, I say this is someone who's interested in ritual worship
That's his
borrows a lot from the Sri Vaishnavas.
Yes.
But I think it's an interesting example because if we kind of carry that logic over, couldn't the same be said of Kirtan?
Yes.
And so why? So what would be the problem with devotees, doing deep study and learning about what is our own Gaudiya history of Kirtan?
Certainly no problem with study, learning, knowing, for example, the intricacies of Narottam Das Thakur's Kirtan style and so on.
Which Prabhupada perhaps didn't give us.
No, he didn't. And it's interesting. I came, also this will be like in the next printing, I came across an article by Guy Beck, who's a musicologist and religious scholar and initiated by Srila Prabhupada's Santosh Das. And in his article, he said essentially that it was that you can come upon Kirtan in the tradition where it's really elaborate. He was specifically talking about the mridanga playing and how you get to, and he knew the names of these various beats, and they're, cycles of 32 beats and 64 beats, really it gets sophisticated. And it's the sort of playing that the leader has to be sophisticated enough to be able to master, and the audience also has to be sophisticated enough. And he said that it was Prabhupada's genius that he kept the mridanga so simple.
Again, that accessibility.
That anybody could fall into the kirtan, anyone could join, whereas the other sort of that complexity becomes a block to the kirtan.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps in some cultural context it becomes an invitation to the kirtan, but from where we sit today, it's really a blocker. And there's so much to be said for, as Prabhupada said, doing as Prabhupada did. And that goes for the deity worship also. It goes for so many things. We can go into the tradition, and we can go into Vrindavan and see all the things that the Brajbasis do, and just buy them wholesale, and feel that we're like really participating in the mood of Braj, because we picked up the local stuff. But we do that. Should think about that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to criticize people who pick up this or that from Vrindavan, but there's.
In terms of specifics, that was something that I don't know if touched a nerve is the right phrase, but that's something that for me it's something I struggle with, because I feel like maybe, Maharaj, with due respect, to me it comes off as a little bit harsh on that kind of picking up, because aren't we aspiring on some level? Aren't we aspiring, Vrajavasis, or aspiring to follow in the footsteps of the Vrajavasis? And
yeah. Now, which Brajbasis are we aspiring to follow in the footsteps of? Mm-hmm. The real estate Brajbasi Walas, the Loy Bajar, Vaishya Brajbasis, the local professional Kirtan Brajbasis, the Opera Sampradaya Brajbasis. When Krishna was asking his father about the Indra Yagya, Krishna asked, "Is this coming from Shastra, or is this just a sort of a traditional festival?"
Right.
Oh, this is a traditional festival. So, all right, we may even appreciate traditional festivals. You go to Vrindavan and you see what the Brajbasis are doing, and you think this is so exuberant and wonderful. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we're meant to import it. Because our principle, our access to the land of Vrindavan is Srila Prabhupada. He's the one who opened the door, and he's also the one who told us to be careful about going down the alleyways. There's so many things. Prabhupada would, just to give an example, Prabhupada would see someone, one of his disciples with gray tilak. So where has he been? He got that in Radhakund, obviously. Who told him to go there? Why are they going there? Who are they meeting? Prabhupada he was vigilant. Why are they going there? Who told them to go there? Who are they hearing from? Why are they going? Told Tamal Krishna Maharaj, everything you need for your spiritual life is within the four walls of this compound.
Krishna Balaram
Mandir. So Prabhupada wasn't just, it's not that he just, whatever you find in Vrindavan, just adopt it because Vrindavan is transcendental. Even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Jagadananda Pandit wants to go to Vrindavan. He's really insisting. Finally, Mahaprabhu says, yes, you can go, but go straight to Rupa and Sanatan, stick with them, and be careful about mixing with the outside people. Because they're on a spontaneous platform, and you don't want to commit offenses. You're not in their category. Just go straight to Rupa Sanatan, stay with them, then come back. So Prabhupada was protective of us like that. And there are many other stories about, I don't think we need to recite them all, but Prabhupada being very protective about who his devotees associated with in Vrindavan, in Gaudiya Math, and so on. And as much as, we're nourished by the Gaudiya Math and by Vrindavan and so on, Prabhupada was very careful. And devotees today may or may not know that, or may not remember that.
Right.
Totally.
It wasn't just one of the people, devotees I quoted, I think, gave the example that in Vrindavan, everybody greets everybody, Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe. And even Prabhupada mentions it, that people, they something calling out to somebody, Jai Radhe, and the person's responding the same way. But then Prabhupada's walking on Chatikar Road now, Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, and the local Brajbasis are greeting him, Jai Radhe. Prabhupada's responding, Hare Krishna.
How do we develop that mood of fidelity when we weren't like that directly with Srila Prabhupada?
Read the book.
I guess is it that it's much naturally comes to those who are directly associated with Srila Prabhupada. I love that though. Because I grew up with that kind of associating with those devotees who are like that. But for future generations, I am like, for my children, for example, like how do I instill in them that same fidelity?
Yes, same. First, of course, become more broadly, but first thing is that's why the book is there, so that you can, as far as I'm able to accomplish it, be with Prabhupada or be with his, hear his instructions or hear about the things he did and said in various contexts. So it's not lost that Prabhupada doesn't become just sort of like a figurehead. You put him on your altar, or you put him on your calendar, and keep Prabhupada in the center, and you keep a little kirtan box playing all the time, but you really don't know what he said about anything.
Right.
Or all you know is what you read in the books, but you don't have the his activities outside the books. So I've tried to make a contribution, collecting Prabhupada's instructions and trying to be faithful to their context, not just rip out quotes and stack them up.
Yeah.
So that we can have the benefit of that. Apart from that, beyond the context of kirtan in my book and so on, it takes some, what shall we say, seriousness, first of all. If we're not serious, then we don't have something to pass on to the next generation. We become like superficial followers of any religion, Hindu religion included, where, we do stuff, but we really don't know why we do it. And some of it is sort of like really just our own sentiment, but it doesn't go deep. So the first thing is having depth in our own practice and strength in our own practice, so that the substance will communicate itself to the next generation. I think that's the main thing. And then we try to inform ourselves. What did Prabhupada say about deity worship? And I think that the deity worship ministry is sort of working on that, trying to preserve Prabhupada's instructions about deity worship and teach people how to do the things that we're meant to do and not do the things we're not meant to do. And in other contexts, other devotees, especially those who had the experience with Prabhupada, can help us. Giriraj Maharaj's books that are coming out now give so many valuable instructions about these things.
So Maharaj, I hear you talking about becoming more aware and educating ourselves, educating one another, educating future generations about, as I think I heard you just say, kind of Prabhupada's instructions about what to do, Prabhupada's instructions about what not to do. I think some of, at least for me, some of the, if you want to call it struggle or the ambivalence, is maybe in that in-between of things that don't quite fit into the category of what not to do, aren't necessarily what Prabhupada explicitly or taught in terms of technicality, but at least to my mind, or trying to use whatever discernment I have, are aligned with or are in the spirit of. And I wonder about those things. And a kind of a related point or question.
Maybe I can do one at a time.
Oh, sure. Yeah, please.
Memory in Kali Yuga. that's the area for our discretion. At least if we know this is out and this is in, all right, that leaves a sort of smaller territory where it's could be this way or it could be that way. And in that area, there may be no wrong choice. It could be this way or it could be that way. And some people will do it this way, some people will do it that way. Or it's gray and it really is the wrong choice, or it really is the right choice. But that should be a smaller area once we're better informed about what Prabhupada said to do, what Prabhupada said not to do. Just like Rupa Goswami, I'm giving the basic principles, the rest are details. Details may differ from here to there. It doesn't mean because they're doing it this way here and that way there, one of them must be wrong.
Right.
There's space. So our discretion and also the instructions of our own spiritual master. He asked the spiritual master, should I do this? Should I do that? He said, do this. All right. Question solved.
Yeah.
Not gray anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess sort of on a related note, and thank you, that's really helpful. One, I think, could read this perhaps in a superficial way and interpret everything that falls outside of Srila Prabhupada's Kirtan Standards as being
deviant.
I was just about to use that word. And one of the things that, I think, Namana, we were talking about this earlier in preparation for this podcast, where might there be value in sort of nuancing where some things are clearly, deviant in the sense of they actually are taking us astray, either connecting us to something that is against our Siddhanta or confusing us or introducing some kind of, right? And we can maybe talk about particular examples of that. The one that comes to my mind is the sort of somewhat famous or infamous, what is it? Nitai Gaur Radhe Sham, Radhe Hare Krishna Hare Ram.
Right.
Where in that particular form is associated with a very particular, right? So there's implications there. It's not just, oh, these are nice names put together, but there's implications. Okay, that's one thing. But then there are things that are not what Prabhupada did, and in some cases may even, on a certain level, differ and even maybe contradict, but seen sort of objectively are not harmful per se, right? And maybe all of this is my inelegant buildup to the thing that, to a particular that comes up a lot, which is like chanting of the deity's names, for instance. In Kirtan, in front of the deity for a elongated period of time. To me, that, unless I'm misunderstanding something, that would be an example of something that is, I don't see a harm to my spiritual life or the spiritual lives of others.
That was, I think, the conclusion. Let's see.
The deity mantra is on page 96. Is that it?
That's it.
Yeah.
96 through 102. So we go to 102, where the conclusion should be. May we chant deity mantras? Yes. Must we? No.
Right.
Did Srila Prabhupada? No. What can we do instead? We can do what Srila Prabhupada did. Just keep chanting Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
That comes after sort of an opening in which we find that Prabhupada himself authorized or permitted the chanting of deity names. Shrutadeva asked, can we chant Jai Radha Nandanishwara, Prabhupada Prandhane? And Prabhupada said yes. So it's not, clearly it's not forbidden, but it's also not de rigueur. It's not that, and that was another instance in which I've quoted one of my godbrothers who insisted that we we were essentially impersonalists if we don't do this.
Yeah, right.
And
So that's like the pendulum going the other way.
The other way.
This is now a requirement or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think this is a true presentation. Can we? Yes.
Yeah.
Do we have to? No.
People don't know
Prabhupada-
that.
Yeah, that's
People don't
my
know
point.
that Prabhupada didn't, or that
No,
or
that
we don't have to.
you don't have to, because I sang Mangalarti some time ago, and I just ended with Hare Krishna because I feel like it's with the mood of the morning, and like you don't have to sing, you don't have to like Jai Prabhupada or Nitai Gaur Haribol. And some devotee came up to me like,
Why didn't
you
you?
can do that?
Oh, okay.
Like I thought you're supposed to chant Nitai Gaur Haribol and the name of the deities and the Jai Prabhupada, like in
Right.
that order. Like you have to end with Jai Prabhupada and then that's it. And I was like,
that's
no,
the
you don't have to
wonkiness.
chant it.
That's the, I mean, for lack of a better term, that's the wonkiness. That's where things go astray when suddenly now it's like, wait, aren't you supposed to do that? Don't you have to do that?
Exactly.
And then,
Yeah.
And even, you know, like I'm a demon because I somehow suggested that you shouldn't, or that you know, that you don't have to.
Right.
So
and I definitely see that as, I see the danger there.
And also while we're at it, it becomes, you know, then like 20% of the kirtan.
Right.
Yes.
At the expense of the Hare Krishna
Maha
mantra.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, you have Gravastikam, and then you have Jayas, and then you have something else, and then you have more Jayas,
Yeah.
and then more Jayas at the end, and then Nrsingadev's prayers, and then more Jayas, and you know the whole thing becomes filled up with names of deities. I was in Mayapur, and you know, in Kartik, somehow become a Mayapur tradition that after the Damodarastakam they chant this song with you know, Jai such and such deities, and then they go on and on with so many deities, and there's no Hare Krishna. So can you do that? Yeah, you can. Is there a law? No, Moses didn't come down with tablets that said thou shalt not chant the deities' names, but you know what happened to Hare Krishna?
Yeah. So, okay. So again, trying to understand this in terms of a pendulum swinging. So pendulum swung too far to this side. It becomes almost mandatory. In some cases, it is understood to be mandatory. It takes the place of or robs us of sufficient time with the Mahamantra. So that's one danger. I want to look at the other side where, you know, even though I love the way you framed it here, but I also want to push back and say, might there not be a danger to saying, well, can you chant this? Yes. Did Prabhupada chant this? No. Read between the lines. If you chant this thing, what do you think? You're better than Prabhupada, right? Like, so then.
No, because it's up front that Prabhupada said you could do it.
So the question is, so in this case, it's Prabhupada said you could do it. Prabhupada didn't particularly.
He didn't push it.
He didn't push it. He didn't do it
He
himself.
didn't do it himself.
Right.
Can you do it? Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world, but it's, you know, become such an institution.
Right.
You must, and you're a demon if you don't. You're an impersonalist. You don't love the deities. So, you know.
So it's like let's correct that.
And then you've got to concoct even, you know, and I've given examples of, you know, the mantras that get concocted because you have to chant the names of the deities. So that's, you know, that's where it can lead, because you have to chant the names of the deities, and I have to chant the names of all the deities. So you have to chant, you know, as many deities as there are. So you get, you know, Jai Radha.
If you leave one out, it's perceived as an offense or something.
So you get Jai Radha Lada Gopal, and, you know, all of that.
Yeah.
What would you say, in your opinion, is like the most egregious of when you say junk? When we were talking about
Yeah.
Well,
great
Nitai
question.
Gaur Radhe Shyam, but that's not in ISKCON Kirtan.
right.
It's hard to say what's the most egregious. I don't, but in the back I've really put what are some of the things. The most egregious are things that don't come from our sampradaya at all. They're just pop bhajans.
Radhe Shamilade or something.
Radhe Shamilade, for example, or Jai Radha Ramana Haribol, you know, which some devote, you know, they're like standard ISKCON Kirtan in some quarters, although it doesn't come from our sampradaya at all. It has nothing to do with anything Prabhupada gave us, but there it is. So once you start seeing things thrown into the Kirtan that don't even come from not from Prabhupada, not from any of our acharyas, not from our sampradaya, they come from, you know, a recording in popular in Vrindavan one year, or, you know, popular you like Radha Ramana Haribol. It's all over the internet. You can find so many recordings of Radha Ramana Haribol with bells and all of that. But it's not Sampradayic. So our process is a Sampradayic process. It's not just whatever might be Kirtan, whatever has the name of Krishna in it. Mm-hmm. In some place, Prabhupada even says, in answer to some query, there's no harm. But these things are not, and then he goes on basically saying, it's not Sampradayic, really, it doesn't belong.
Chanting bhajans, mantras in Kirtan coming from, acknowledging that they come from outside of our Sampradaya, but coming from, let's say, the Nimarkis or...
There you have, I'm not going to be too particular about that.
Right.
There maybe songs that may be appreciated that come from someplace else. Prabhupada would sometimes say about this or that song, it is not very important.
Mm. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. It's not very important in the sense of...
Not in the sense of the question is important, but when he'd say it is not very important, it carried the imputation that this is not what we do. Don't go down
that road.
Yeah, why are you getting into that? I'm not condemning you.
Yeah,
you can do it, but it is not very important. It means
I didn't see this appendix. This is cool. This is essential. Kirtan Standards summary. Essential things to sing. Recommended by Srila Prabhupada. Chanted in Srila Prabhupada's presence. Implicitly approved. Also approved. Marginal. Sometimes approved.
Yeah, sometimes approved, sometimes not.
Yeah,
I've given instances of that. The Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram.
Right.
Patita Pavana Sitaram. Sometimes Prabhupada approved it or even recommended it. And other times, no, we are not going to do Ram Dhun. Hare Krishna, chant Hare Krishna.
Or even in places where had Ram part of our deities, he said, just continue chanting Hare Krishna. Nothing should be changed about chanting Sita, Ram, Lakshman, Hanuman, because the deities are there.
Because the Sita, right.
Yeah.
Just do exactly as they do in Vrindavan. No new mantras. So, there's... I think that appendix is helpful.
Yeah, it is.
What must we chant? What's approved? What's marginal? Then what's sort of mildly disapproved by Prabhupada? And then what he was really down on the most. That's where you get to the Radhe Sham.
Or disapproved by Srila Prabhupada, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jai Radhe, Jai Gurudev. Jai Gurudev is interesting because that's a very Gaudiya mat. I've heard it so much. But Srila Prabhupada is, it says here impersonal. Who is that Gurudev?
Yeah.
So that's an example of something that is pretty standard or common in the broader Gaudiya Mutt world and not seen as impersonal there.
Right.
But Srila
Prabhupada commented on it.
Yeah. Again, it's Prabhupada's Kirtan Standards.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So Gaudiya Mutt, for example, and other examples, they have their Prema Dwani can really be a long affair.
Right.
It can really be a long affair. And Prabhupada's was quite brief.
Yes.
So it doesn't mean you can't go on and be longer than Prabhupada, but that was his standard. This is how he did it.
Yeah.
And he never said, you can't add this one or that one.
Mm-hmm.
But that was his standard. Here's how he did it. Mm-hmm. If you like, you can be, exactly the way he did it.
Yeah.
Or you can be a little further, or you can go whole hog Gaudiya Mutt style, which is not to disparage it. I don't mean, pardon whole hog, but I just meant they chant it more
full
extensively.
On, whole 9 yards. Yeah.
But yes, so there may be things that. So Jai Gurudev, what can I do, Prabhupada? I have it reliably attested by at least 2 devotees who were in Prabhupada's direct presence, that Prabhupada said, "What is this, Jai Gurudev?" Kripamoya Prabhu, I think, is one of them. Word came down from upstairs that Prabhupada said, "No, not Jai Gurudev." So these are instructions. Do I have something to add to it? Not much. I understand, by the way, why it's chanted so much. In Prabhupada's time, we didn't get much into Jai Gurudev. It wasn't.
You didn't need to.
We didn't need to. And sometimes it was there, and Prabhupada said, "What is this?" But now I understand the reason. It's because you want to be inclusive about other Gurudevas.
Right. Now we have a landscape.
a multi-guru society, and so you want to acknowledge that. And so Jai Prabhupada, but also Jai Gurudev.
Right.
So, but then that gets you into the problem that Prabhupada was down on Jai Gurudev.
Who is that Gurudev?
Who is that Gurudev?
Yeah.
So what can you do about that? And I think I put it out there that way in the book, that in our multi-guru society, as Kripamoya Prabhu put it, there's this Jai Gurudev chanted for that reason. So what can you do?
Yeah.
My own approach to it is just leave it. You don't need a lot of jayas and jayas and jayas.
And it says here, accepted only if chanted before one chants the name of the spiritual master.
Yeah, that was the instruction that was relayed by Kripamoya Prabhu, that he heard at Bhaktivedanta Manor, that Prabhupada said, all right, if you chant Jai Gurudev followed by the name of your spiritual master, then it's not impersonal anymore.
Right.
Otherwise it's not a particular thing with me, but there it is, that, when I was collecting the instructions, that was one of them. Is that a Jayadvaita Swami's take on Kirtan Standards? I have no horse in the race. It's just, that's what Prabhupada said.
Yeah.
And what should you think about it? You're your own man. Think what you want about it. But now you know.
I know we're coming up on time. We're coming up
to 2 hours now. Yeah.
It's a fascinating conversation. I love the idea of the start of a conversation. At the risk of opening a can of worms as we approach the 2 hour mark, maybe if you could just touch on this, but how would you respond to someone saying, well, a lot of the evidence, the examples, the anecdotes, etc., speak to Prabhupada in a particular time with fledgling, is that the word? Fledgling young disciples, most of whom were outside of a culture that they were adopting and therefore needed a lot of guidance. Here we are, we've had a movement, we've gone through ups and downs, we're,
50 years
in. And we also, there have been, for better and for worse, people have, all sorts of things to say about this, but it's a reality. There have been demographic shifts. We now have much more, we have a larger contingent of folks who are much more familiar with and come out of the broader Indian, Hindu, Vedic cultures. They get the nuances. How do we account for that and adjust when we're looking at some of these standards and instructions? Or do we at all? Or is any of that relevant?
No harm, being aware of our surroundings or our demographics, certainly. And I think I was just discussing, your dad and I were just appreciating Vishnu Gada Prabhu.
Oh, yeah.
And he was very expert in the early days of the Tuako Temple, where he was perhaps one of the very first devotees to see our Indian guests as prospective devotees and not just as sort of foreign visitors or sources of income.
Yeah.
He saw that these people can be wonderful devotees, and he proved it.
Yeah.
But he was a little tactful about how he did it. You know, people had their local Gujarati bhajans, and he didn't shut them down.
I remember singing them
Yeah.
as a kid.
That's such a great point.
I remember singing them as a kid.
So he was expert. You know, you listen to Vishnu Gada's kirtans, it's like very straight up and down. Vishnu Gada Prabhu is really a straight arrow when it comes to kirtan. But in terms of preaching, he knew how to give a little space so that people could come to ISKCON and to Prabhupada and to Prabhupada's standards. So there is certainly the case to be made for expertise in knowing when to bring up standards and when to just cut people some slack and say, well, we know this is the standard, but under these circumstances, we're not going to worry about it. Not that we stand up in the middle, stop, you know.
Right.
Great point.
Maybe Prabhupada would, but maybe he wouldn't. So we need to be thoughtful and, again, strong in Krishna consciousness.
Right.
If we're strong in the culture, if we're strong in our practice, if we're aware of what Prabhupada taught, then we're in a good position to apply. You know, the surgeon who's had so many years of training and experience knows where to use the knife and where to hold back and say, well, you know, intervention at this point is, you know, maybe not such a good idea. We'll wait and watch. So that comes from experience, but it comes from training also. It's not just that you and I come and say, well, you know, I don't think that doesn't have the same authority or the same, reflect the same depth of expertise. So we want to develop that, and that comes, again, always from being strong in Krishna consciousness, strong in our sadhana, strong in hearing and chanting, strong in hearing from Bhagavad Gita as it is, Srimad Bhagavatam, associating with devotees, following the principles. Then when it comes time to go out there and deliver the goods, we'll be in a good position. Krishna will help us. He'll see this is a serious man. Let's help him out. He's trying to do something.
Yeah.
And even if we sometimes go off a little this way or off a little that way, Krishna will help us. If we're not serious, then everything becomes lost over time. Sakalaneha mata yoganashta parantapa. So that's one answer. Another answer, going back to, well, the circumstances have changed, the environment has changed. That's true, and yet Prabhupada was quite particular in what he chanted and what he taught us. He came from that same Hindu background. He came from India. He knew what, you know, all these other things that went on, or that people chant popularly or traditionally. And he didn't introduce them and even objected when we introduced this or that. I think it's selling Prabhupada. And I'm always sort of troubled or unpersuaded by the argument that takes the form, well, this is what Prabhupada taught then, but if Prabhupada were here now, you know, he would be teaching us, you know, we'd be deeply immersed in study of Ujjvala Nilmani, or we would be chanting, you know, all sorts of other things, or we would be doing the most elaborate Sri Vaishnav Puja imaginable, or, you know, what have you. Choose your items from the menu. You know, that was then, but if Prabhupada were here now, then everything would be different. Then, you know, are we really following? Or are we following what, you know, what we want? Are we being whimsical? Are we being, are we straying from what Prabhupada taught? And my usual preference on my side is if you stick to what Prabhupada said and what Prabhupada did, you won't be wrong. If you do something else, maybe you won't be wrong.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. We should end there. Maharaj, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. And
Beautiful.
Yeah, I loved hearing about the book. I loved hearing all your realizations and answering our questions, and really honored that you came and did that with us.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Krishna. If you want to, if you want this book, we'll put the link in the description how you can order this book. And I know, Maharaj, you said that it's getting reprinted also. So
Yeah, the copies are starting to run short, so we're reprinting.
yeah. So, and also if I'll also put Maharaj's website. He also regularly writes on his website different updates from his travels and things like that. So that's really interesting. I love reading that. Again, thank you, Maharaj. Thank you, Venkatavata, for joining us also. And please like, subscribe, and comment, and also donate if you can to the Namras podcast. Hare Krishna. Have a good night. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Namras.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Krishna, Hare